Well, Nigel Farage has unveiled Dan Thomas as the leader of Wales for Reform UK. He is a former leader of Barnet Council in North London. He was a Tory leader then, of course, and he defected to Reform in December.
It's going to be a very interesting election, Andrew, because I think most people agree that Labour are not going to do very well and the Conservatives are not going to do very well. But who's going to end up as the biggest party? Will it be Plaid Cymru or Reform? It could make a huge difference.
Yeah. And remember, Labour, Wales has been a Labour heartland for decades, and they lost that Caerphilly by-election last year to Plaid, which was a real turn-up. Again, that was a seat they'd held for over 100 years. So
anything could happen, but one man who's keen for Reform to do well is the senior advisor to Nigel Farage, James Orr, who joins us now. James, thank you so much for coming into the studio. We've focused so much on England, the polls in England, and of course there's a by-election going on in the Manchester area right now. But tell us why Wales is so significant for Reform.
Well, it's significant for Reform because the story has been for so long that Reform is a pro-England party. And it's just a one-issue party, just focusing on immigration. But it's now very clear, as Andrew mentioned, the success in Caerphilly shows that we are able to make huge inroads into Labour heartlands. I mean, that's, Caerphilly was Keir Hardie country.
Yeah.
We went from, I think, 2% in 2021 to 36% in Caerphilly last year. Now, the media narrative was Reform fell at the last hurdle, let Plaid in, the tactical voting. In fact, our internal polling suggests that if there was any tactical voting, it was going for Plaid as the stop Starmer party over us. But it's still quite extraordinary what we're seeing here in the history of British politics, not just in Wales, but of course in Scotland.
I was going to mention Scotland, because Scotland, again, has been an area where it's been barren territory for Reform thus far, but that is changing.
Well, it's been barren territory for the right. I mean, the Tories, I remember there's the old Margaret Thatcher joke when she was introduced to Fraser Nelson as a Scottish Conservative, and she said, so you're the one. But yet it looks as if, on current polling, we're going to get between 20 and 23 seats in Holyrood, and will be a firm second, and I think we're going to edge out Labour. This is simply extraordinary. The Conservative Party has never been able to get those sorts of numbers in Scotland in living memory. So too in Wales, and so too up in parts of the north that you mentioned, more Labour heartlands where it looks like we're being extremely competitive, and effectively the Conservative and Unionist Party has ceased to be a party of the Union. I think that's going to be very, very clear after May the 7th, and I think what we're seeing is quite remarkable. And I think it also gives the lie to this idea that it's sort of all these Tory defectors are turning us into the Tories 2.0, the sort of retirement home for the Tories line. If that were the case, we wouldn't be going from 2% in Keir Hardie's old constituency to 36%. We would not be as competitive as we are in Labour heartlands up north, and we would not be as competitive as we are it being in Scotland.
There's nothing more important than keeping you and your loved ones safe online. With so many VPN options available, choosing the right one can be pretty daunting. And with their Valentine's Day sale, this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN, is making the choice easier for GB News viewers. It's the easiest way to stay safe online, protect your money, and save big for less than £2 a month. Click the link in the video's description or scan the QR code today.
But the advantage that Reform has, as you've said, in Wales and Scotland is that there is not a particularly strong Tory party history there. They've done very poorly in recent elections, perhaps 2019 being the exception to that. Whereas in England, which of course has the vast majority of our population, and the big prize is the general election in 2029, there is still this Tory vote of at least 20%, which could make it very difficult for the right overall to win. How are Reform going to approach that?
Well, I mean, I'd say that Reform is beginning to, after a slightly shaky December, we've gone back up to the high 20s, low 30s. The Tories, some polls put them on 20%, but, as we know with first past the post, there are tipping points. And right now, I would say that the Tory party in the high teens is at extinction level. It's at double digits in terms of seats. And so, I think there's still, at the moment, 4 years, 3-4 years is a very long time to wait. And it may be that an election is called a bit sooner than that, but I think we're opening up a very, very big a big margin on the Conservative Party. And I think, my sense is there's 3, 4, 5 points still in the Tory vote, Conservative voters who are looking at us very closely. and I think will be inspired to vote for us as they start to see real electoral success in early May, and as they start to see a really strong top team emerging around Nigel Farage.
A criticism of Starmer's administration is, what does it stand for? What is the narrative? What is his vision? What do people know what reform stands for, apart from being very tough talk on immigration? Because you completely junked your economic programme, which you had all those ambitious plans, taking people out of tax until they were earning £20,000, restoring the two-child benefit cap. All that's gone. So what does reform stand for, apart from being tough on migration?
Well, first of all, being tough on migration is a very, very important thing to be tough on, because I think what the electorate now recognise is that immigration is not simply a siloed issue that is very important but is unconnected to strain on public services, depressing workers' wages, creating sort of all kinds of sort of problems around cultural cohesion. So the fact that we have been so consistent for so long that nobody in the country is wondering what reform thinks about immigration, just as nobody in the country is wondering what reform thinks about net zero or cost of living or crime and law and order and so on. So there is a clarity there across all the sort of big policy North Stars. But to answer your question more generally, Andrew, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Keir Starmer is an ideology, philosophy-free zone. I would say the same is true of the Conservative Party, whereas I think people look at reform and they see that it stands for the politics of home, the politics of family, of community, of country. That's the slogan that Nigel Farage came back with, perhaps slightly surprisingly to some, when he re-entered the fray in 2024. And home is something that resonates. What is it to be a home? What is it to be a national home? How do we cultivate home? How do we work out on what terms guests to our home are arriving and how long they stay, and so on and so forth. And I think that's the sort of animating metaphor. And I think really that's been the politics of the West since 2016. I think you saw this long period from 1945 to 2016, which was effectively the politics of the cosmopolis, the politics of anywhere land, the politics of nowhere, in other words, of international, democratically unaccountable organisations. And you're seeing all across the West now, in America, of course, now in Australia, all across continental Europe, and most of all here, in the cradle of democracy, parliamentary democracy itself, a party that is not bothered with the old politics of left and right, the dead hand of legacy ideologies from the Uni Party, but is focused on national loyalty, national preference, the national family, on home.
So if you're right, if people catch this vision, if Reform win a majority at the next election, that's your hope, that's your prediction perhaps, how will you then deliver on what you promised? We've seen the Conservative Party fall apart under sleaze allegations and changing leaders in the last Parliament. We're seeing exactly the same thing happen to Labour. How are Reform not going to fall into that same trap?
Well, look, politicians are human beings. No human beings are perfect. And I'm not going to say now that Reform is going to be completely free of any of the normal challenges and difficulties that any political party is going to face. We've got 3 or 4 years still to prepare ahead of 2029. It might be sooner than that. We are working incredibly hard. We're facing probably one of the biggest personnel challenges that any political party has faced in history. That's immensely exciting, because one of the great things about starting an entirely new political movement is that you're free from a lot of the kind of backbiting and caucuses and factionalism that is affecting and undermining the existing parties.
But you're also bereft of people around the top table who've been in government and know how to make things work.
Well, that's not quite true, Andrew. I mean, it seems you can't win. You know, either we're a one-man band, or we're sort of, taking on people, Tory defect, or we're a retirement home. We're actually taking on people with significant ministerial experience now.
Well, you got a couple. In
Suella Braverman and in Robert Jenrick. Danny Kruger, though, hasn't got formal ministerial experience, was a political secretary in Downing Street, was Cameron speechwriter and so on. We've got Nadeem Zahawi and so on. And I think we'll be seeing more, I hope, before the transfer window closes on May the 7th.
That's interesting.
Well, James Orr, thank you so much for your time this morning. Fascinating to speak to you.
Really.